with the magic touch of push-button driving.
Those who think getting a car phone is not for them, whatever the reason.
Fan of everything that's on this car that you see in the interior.
Having a vehicle back in the day was more than just something you took from point A to point B. It was the perfect show of status. It told people where you belonged on the social strata, but as cars evolved, so did our needs. Today, we'll learn about useless old car features that faded into history.
Ladies and gentlemen, now push-button driving is here.
Push-button automatic transmission. Whenever you needed to change gears in your car, all you had to do was press a button on the dashboard to select drive, reverse, or neutral. Push-button automatic transmissions were much more fun until people realized it took some serious levels of IQ to remember what each button stood for in the face of an emergency. The joy of using a button isn't worth the accidents that came from it. If you were used to the grip of a traditional gear, the push button may be hard to get used to, and you could feel a disconnect from your car. You may be gripping an imaginary gear when you're supposed to be hitting a button because your hands are just used to it. It would lead to an accident before you realized what was different. Windshield washer foot pump. If you've ever been concerned about having control over the fluid you spray to clean your windshield while driving, the washer foot pump would have been your perfect go-to. The windshield washer foot pump required you to take your feet off the accelerator. Not practical when driving on a busy road during bad weather. You may find yourself fumbling with your foot on the pump while trying to focus on the road and avoid a crash. It was not the safest or even most efficient way to get your windshield cleaned.
You ever notice how winding your window down by hand makes you look lower middle class?
Manual crank windows. The amount of work required to manually crank down the window, especially on a larger vehicle, could last for a day at the gym. The process of rolling down the window was slow, and getting it back up felt even slower when you were in a hurry or a storm. If you wanted fresh air on a hot day, you had to reach across the car to crank down each window individually. Nobody wanted such a level of inconvenience. Kids in the back seat were often at the mercy of an adult to roll their windows down because trying to do it themselves was out of the question. Ashtrays and lighters. Back in the day, cigarette lighters were an essential in cars, a time when smoking was widely accepted in everyday life, even while driving. If you got a new vehicle, it came equipped with a built-in lighter. This simple spring-loaded heating element would ignite when you pressed into its socket. After heating up, it would pop out, ready to light your cigarette with a glowing orange coil. Along with that experience came the ashtray, which made the perfect combo to make smoking while driving convenient for the drivers and passengers on the go. Now that smoking has declined due to health concerns and stricter regulations, the need for these items is gone. Bench seats. The perfect picture of the classic American driving experience for a family ride-along was when you're driving across town with everyone in the car and sliding over close to each other on the seat while singing your favorite song or planning what to do. This was possible because cars had wide and flat seats spanning the entire width of the front, allowing up to 3 people to sit side by side. You can imagine how impossible it is to fit a seatbelt over that. The center position on the bench seat was the favorite for most people because they got to enjoy more space and direct access to other passengers. But it was also the most dangerous. There was nowhere to grab whenever an accident took place. Curb feelers. One of the most annoying things to someone who owned a vehicle with a curb feeler was getting to a restaurant or a concert where there was barely enough space to park without causing a dent trying to fit in. Curb feelers were there to help you avoid damaging your tires and hubcaps, and these metal wires that looked like springs were attached to the fenders of the car. They would protrude outward just enough to make contact with the curb before your tires did, and as soon as it touched the curb, it would make a distinct noise. Something like a light scraping sound that alerted you were getting too close, and had to adjust your steering. As exciting as it is, it's not something needed in today's world. Today's vehicles come with backup cameras, parking sensors, and better visibility. So you no longer have an external wire to park safely. Automatic seat belts. This was a time when people were being educated on the importance of a seatbelt in an effort to keep people safe during an accident. As soon as you shut the car door or turned on your ignition, motorized seat belts would automatically slide along a track that was mounted on the door frame, moving into place across your chest. The idea was to make it easier for people to buckle up or even do it for them without any extra effort. While the concept seemed innovative, automatic seat belts were often more of a nuisance than a convenience in reality. The belts could be slow and noisy, and in some cases unreliable, and they also didn't reliably secure the lap belt. This left drivers and passengers with partial protection unless they manually fastened the lap portion themselves. It was a false sense of security and even more danger in the event of an accident. Drivers found them irritating because it was like being strapped in by a moving belt. It was uncomfortable, and if you tried to hit the exit before the system disengaged, you could feel like you were trapped.
Those who think getting a car phone is not for them, whatever the reason, haven't kept up with the booming industry of cellular radio telephones.
Car phones. Before cell phones became something everybody owned, large and clunky car phones were the active superheroes saving the world. Mounted directly into the car, you'd see them in the center console or dashboard. They allowed drivers to make calls on the go at a time when making a call was either from a lifeline at home, the office, or a hotel. And if you thought for a millisecond they were like the sleek mobile devices we have today, well, think again. Bulky, expensive, and having limited coverage, the hardware required to operate them took up significant space. They also had to work through networks that do not have the reliability of today's cellular network. As technology rapidly advanced in the late 90s, the rise of portable cell phones made car phones obsolete almost overnight. Smaller and more affordable mobile phones with better network coverage replaced the car phone. Hand crank sunroofs. Hand crank sunroofs were the standard for anyone wanting to enjoy some fresh air and sunlight while driving. All it required from you was for you to physically turn a crank open and close the panel. It was usually located on the rooftop, controlling ventilation without relying on electrical components. It was not as perfect as you may think, though. Cranking it open could take a lot of effort, especially if the gears or mechanisms were worn out. It was also awkward and distracting to operate while driving. The issue of weather resistance, you'd find it hard to seal it tightly, and it would end up leading to leaks during heavy rain or while washing the car. Headlight dimmer switch on the floor. This switch allowed you to toggle between high and low beams by simply pressing a button with your foot. It gave drivers quick and easy access to dim their headlights without taking their hands off the wheel. It sounds like a practical solution for driving at night, but the problem was how hard it was to memorize the location of the switch. There are many things you had to consider while driving, but one of them should never be looking down while driving, because you were trying to find a button. This was the case for many new drivers. It also got worn out or began to malfunction over time because the area around the switch could get dirty and wet during the rainy or snowy season. Tail fins. There was a time in the automobile industry when the major decision makers were mostly space exploration and aviation fans. Think about automobiles like Cadillac, Chrysler, and Chevy. This was a time when even though people could not get to the moon, they brought the experience to Earth by making cars into what looked like rockets. They began adding large and sweeping fins to the rear, and if you're an aviation and space fan, you'd see the rocket's appearance as futuristic. The idea was to evoke speed, power, and modern times, and it was perfect because it was a way of capturing the spirit of post-war optimism and technological advancement that was on at the time. These dramatic tail fins began modestly in the late 40s, but by the 50s they had grown into extravagant, towering structures that gave cars a distinct and outlandish look. The '59 Cadillac Eldorado, with its massive pointy fins, is perhaps the most famous example. Safety concerns grew over the fins and their sharp edges, and they also added unnecessary bulk to cars, making them harder to park
Of everything
and
that's
a
on
lot
this
less
car that
fuel
you see in
efficient.
the interior.
Swivel seats. These seats rotated outward toward the door and allowed you out. The simple step out rather than awkwardly maneuvering yourself out of the static seat was particularly helpful for older adults and people with mobility issues. Those who loved wearing tight skirts or formal outfits but didn't like the waddling you had to do would love these. The seats allowed them to skip that part and just get into the car. The concept seemed like a brilliant solution, adding a touch of luxury and convenience to cars like the Chevy Monte Carlo in the 70s. But despite its utility, it came with certain drawbacks. Mechanisms that allowed the seat to rotate were complex, adding extra weight and cost, and over time they could wear out or malfunction, leading to maintenance issues. Ornaments. Ornaments were once a common feature of vehicles in the early 20th century, and more than just a decorative element. They served a practical purpose. One such example was the radiator cap ornament that doubled as an engine temperature gauge. The designs mounted on the hood of the car would show the driver the engine's temperature by using a visible thermometer. The combination of style and functionality added a touch of flair while helping drivers monitor the engine's health. Over time, automakers embraced the trend, and radiator cap ornaments evolved into iconic designs. The Boyce Motometer, for example, was a popular brand incorporating a thermometer, allowing drivers to easily check the engine from the driver's seat. Eventually, they evolved into purely decorative ornaments like Cadillac's famous Flying Lady or Rolls-Royce's Spirit of Ecstasy, and as engine technology improved and dashboards became more sophisticated, the need for these ornaments faded. Retractable antennas. This was the best for people who love listening to radio on the go. The motorized antennas would automatically extend when the radio was turned on and go back when it was off, protecting it from damage while giving the vehicle a sleek, streamlined appearance. These structures could be disassembled, retractable, or bent and folded. Retractable antennas were portable, omnidirectional, and had good maneuverability. While they were convenient and minimized the chance of being bent or broken, they were not without issue. The mechanism could wear out over time, leading to malfunctions where the antenna would either get stuck or, additionally, the design of the antennas made them vulnerable to strong winds, car washes, and accidental impact. Bubble tops. If you wanted to feel as though you were cruising through the atmosphere in a cockpit, a bubble top gave you that sleek jet-like appearance. The dome-like roofs were often made of plexiglass or similar materials, creating a striking and panoramic view for the occupants of the car. They were famously featured on concept cars, like the Ford FX Atmos and the Chevy Astro II, representing the forward-thinking designs of the era. While visually stunning, they lacked practicality for everyday use, the problem being that driving around in a virtual greenhouse was hot and not practical, even if it looked futuristic. The clear domes offered little protection from the sun, leading to extreme heat on the inside, and without proper insulation or tinting, you may begin to feel like you're actually cooking. The bubble tops provided limited ventilation, and their unique shape made them expensive to make and difficult to put into conventional vehicle designs. Vent windows. Vent glass is positioned beside a movable door glass in a car and is usually triangular. Designed to provide ventilation without air conditioning, they were hinged and could be tilted or rotated outward, allowing you to direct fresh air into the car without having to roll down the main window. An easy way to cool the car and get ventilation, especially before air conditioning became standard. Vent windows were popular for practicality, allowing for a controlled amount of airflow while reducing wind noise and keeping rain from getting in the cabin. They also offered smokers a convenient way to clear smoke from the car without having to open a larger window, which would have disrupted airflow or let in too much wind. Manual choke. Driving your car in the cold was not a problem because of the availability of the manual choke, a time before modern fuel injection systems were manufactured to automate the process. To kickstart your engine, you had to manually control the air-fuel mixture using a choke knob or lever located on the dashboard. It worked by restricting the amount of air entering the carburetor, enriching the fuel mixture to help the engine fire up when it was cold. Using the choke required skill and timing. You needed to pull the knob out to reduce the airflow and start the engine, and once it was warmed up, you'd gradually push the choke back in to restore the air-fuel balance. Failing to adjust the choke properly and precisely would result in the engine stalling, flooding, or running inefficiently. On particularly cold days, finding the correct balance would be your only chance of getting moving. As useful as the manual choke was, it was also a source of frustration for many. Auto-dimming headlights. Auto-dimming headlights were an early attempt to make nighttime driving easier. The system used sensors to detect oncoming headlights and automatically dim the car's high beams to avoid blinding other drivers. These early systems were notoriously unreliable, often failing to dim at the right time or overreacting, switching between high and low erratically. As a result, many drivers found themselves manually adjusting, making the feature more of a hassle than a help. Seatbelt buzzers. In the 1970s, many cars were equipped with loud, obnoxious seatbelt buzzers that would sound if the seatbelt wasn't fastened after the car had started. While intending to encourage seatbelt use, the constant buzzing became a nuisance, especially when the system malfunctioned or drivers simply had to move the car a short distance. The buzzers were so disliked that people figured out ways to disable them, and over time, more subtle warning systems like indicator lights and chimes would replace the annoying buzzer. Vacuum windshield wipers. Before electric wipers became standard, some vehicles were equipped with vacuum-powered wipers that were operated using the engine's vacuum pressure. They were notorious for being unreliable. The speed would vary depending on the engine load. The faster the car went, the slower the wipers moved. That was the opposite of what you needed to do, and conversely, if the car was idling, the wipers would speed up. This inconsistency made driving in the rain frustrating, and drivers were left struggling with slow wipers when they needed them the most. Which of these features do you think would make a worthy comeback? Let me know in the comments section down below, and if you like this video, you'll want to see this one about things no longer found in a gas station. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a memory in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.